y'all. I'm Trey Tarrant. We've been members here since 2008. Last time I did this, it was 2017, and I went back and watched the video and said, man, I'm really talking fast and not enunciating my words, so I'm going to try to do better with that this time, and Heather's supposed to flag me down if I get out of hand. So, my other self-criticism when I was a little too preachy, and I think I've already failed on that front. So I apologize in advance for that. So years ago when I had young kids in the RE program, I did the Earth Day Time for All Ages 2 times. On both occasions, I began with an illustration of the timeline of the Earth from the first life to the industrial age. Slow down, okay. So I timed this for 20 minutes, so if I speak slower, it's going to take longer. The purpose of that illustration on Earth Day was to point out that all the environmental damage that has ever happened on Earth has occurred during a geologically insignificant amount of time during the last 200 years. Before that, there was no such thing as pollution. Everything on Earth existed in perfect balance until humans showed up with their fancy and marvelous machines. My hope was that this illustration would help to put the current environmental situation in perspective. Now, what I'm going to talk about today is not directly related to environmental destruction, but oddly, I feel compelled to frame it the same way. What it is about me that makes me want to frame philosophical questions in these cosmological terms, I'm not sure. What if Immanuel Kant had framed things like that? Here we are, floating through space on this big rock upon which we have sprung up from the primordial ooze, and therefore we should not act unless we want for the underlying impetus for our actions to form the basis of universal law. But wait, that kind of works, doesn't it? Let's find out. 13.8 billion years ago, an unimaginably dense and hot singularity exploded and began to rapidly expand. For the next several billion years, the swirling chaos of matter and energy began to form galaxies, stars, comets, planets, and nebulae. About 4.5 billion years ago, a rather unremarkable planet and an unremarkable galaxy began to take shape. About 1 billion years after the Earth forms, for reasons still not fully understood, amino acids started to become organized in peculiar and self-replicating and unprecedented ways, eventually forming what we think of as bacteria and other unicellular life. These single-celled life forms changed and evolved in myriad ways. But here's an amazing fact. It would be another 2 billion years before multicellular life came into existence. A planet full of countless species of single-celled organisms, and it would be 2 billion years before a few of them got together and figured out how to become a multicellular life form. It would be another billion years or so before what we now call animals began to appear, about 700 million years ago. The first dinosaurs came on the scene about 230 million years ago, and their reign lasted until about 60 million years ago. Geologically speaking, the dinosaurs were just here, like a little while ago. Their bones are still lying around everywhere. We now know that what brought an end to the dinosaurs was a giant meteor called Chicxulub, and that it landed in the Gulf of Mexico near the Yucatan Peninsula. Chicxulub punched a hole 20 miles deep in the crust of the Earth and created a worldwide firestorm that engulfed the world in darkness for the next several years. The dinosaurs were no more, but gradually life began to reemerge from the ashes, notably a species of tiny shrew-like animal whose burrowing habit likely allowed it to survive the Great Cataclysm. Over the next 50 million years, these little guys evolved to become early hominids, Homo sapiens' early primate ancestors. These hominid species evolved into several species of human, with only one species surviving into modern times, us, the Homo sapiens. The thing is, none of that had to happen if Earth were only a slightly different mix of gas and minerals, if multicellular life never formed, if the Chicxulub meteor were just a few miles one direction or the other, early shrew-like ancestors were lost to the catastrophe. It's all just an unimaginably unlikely scenario. But here we are. Apes in strange clothing with odd toys, floating through space at 66,000 miles per hour, looking around blankly at each other, blinking dumbly in the blinding light of day, asking ourselves and each other, where are we? How did we get here? Where is that large automobile? That's really the only interesting question, isn't it? What are we doing here? What is the meaning of this? On what basis do we attempt to construct these universal laws that Kant referred to? Upon what foundation do we attempt to build a philosophy of existence? A basis for relating to each other and ourselves, now that we find ourselves stranded on this big floating island with a few billion of our fellow Homo sapiens. Human beings have attempted to answer those questions in a lot of ways. Some say that life is a game, the object of which is to acquire ever greater amounts of material wealth and power. Some say life is fundamentally irrational and meaningless, and that pursuits of purpose are pointless. Some say life is an exercise in manifesting the ego, finding purpose in creativity and ambition. Existentialists, among others, say that life has no inherent meaning, but that meaning is created by the individual. Jesus said that the purpose of life is to love one's neighbor. The philosophies which seem to characterize the general UU ethos are those that center on kindness, on minimizing harm and suffering, and those are the points of view that I feel most drawn to. So here we are. We've been plopped down upon this big floating rock. What a crazy, ridiculous, accidental miracle. There are trees, mountains, rivers, sunsets, food, dogs, families, friends, and frogs. Let's have a big old party. Let's call it planet Earth. What else could possibly matter but loving each other at this point? In this framing, doesn't vanity, hate, materialism, and selfishness just seem like a waste of time? But we're faced with some big questions, we voyagers on Spaceship Earth. Primary among them, what brings meaning to existence? The existentialists would say our perception of meaning creates meaning. Yes, but hypothetically, if the world were full of joyless people, that wouldn't seem very meaningful. Maybe significant in some kind of cosmological sense, but I would posit that there's not a lot of meaning being created where there is no joy. Meaning comes from enjoyment, happiness, love, the wonder in a sunset, the warmth of a hug, the feeling that we're not alone and that we mean something to those around us. In fact, that could be the only meaningful thing in the universe. Kindness is, therefore, the act of creating meaning. In other words, we create meaning when, and I would argue only when, we create happiness, joy, wonder, love, and peace, the kinds of things that make existence valuable. According to psychological science, a few things reliably increase happiness in humans. First, if you're constantly running around in fear of your own safety and that of your loved ones, or feeling insecure in terms of food and shelter, there's not a lot of time left for finding joy. Beyond that, there are a few things that reliably make people happier. One, developing close connections with people in your life. Two, the one that I always talked about, the one that I talked about last time I was up here, cultivating a sense of connection with the natural world. Three, developing a relationship with animals. Four, having a sense of creativity, autonomy, and purpose, a feeling that we're doing something that means something. Five, serving in some way. To serve in this context is to make someone else's life better in some way, to open up possibilities for happiness, joy, love, and peace. In other words, then, to serve is to create meaning. I'd like to think that most people have a sort of greatest hits list of regrets that starts playing on a loop in our minds when we can't sleep at night. My wife didn't seem to know what I was talking about when I asked her about that, so I guess it doesn't necessarily apply to you if you happen to be one of those obnoxiously perfect people. But I think that most of us live with some regrets that haunt us a little. Personally, I've done plenty of stupid things, but the ones that really get to me are the times when I hurt someone, when I cause someone to feel sadness. I think the reason for that is that causing harm is sort of the opposite of serving. Harm is the thief of destiny and the destroyer of meaning, not only for the objects of our misdeeds, but maybe more importantly to ourselves. It's a double-edged sword. We deprived ourselves of the opportunity to create goodness, to create meaning in someone else's life, and in so doing, we diminish the meaning of our own lives. In the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu says, kindness in words creates confidence. Kindness in thought creates profoundness. Kindness in giving creates love. Kindness, then, is that which promotes goodness in deed and in thought and leads to the creation of love. Famously, Rumi, the 13th century Sufi mystic, said, before you speak, let your words pass through 3 gates. 1, is it true? 2, is it necessary? 3, is it kind? According to Rumi, words that lack kindness are words that should not be spoken. You may have noticed that this great rock upon which we float through the cosmos suffers from a tremendous lack of kindness. All around us there are stunning levels of suffering, hardship, malicious intent, greed, and anger. All those things which destroy meaning. Human beings are inherently flawed creatures. We can be mean, selfish, petty, jealous, given to anger and vengeance. We've all got those 2 little guys on each shoulder, fighting in our ears about what sort of energy we're about to spin off into the world around us. The goal, as I see it, is to figure out how to allow the better angels to win the argument more often, to figure out how to be creators of meaning rather than destroyers, to rise up from the confines of this mortal coil and be the sort of agents of love that we want to be. Now, trying to convince a bunch of UUs that the group of the importance of kindness is like trying to convince a bunch of QAnons that vaccines are bad. It's sort of a done deal. But at this point, I need to make a little confession. I brought you this far in order to get to the second part of my little thesis, and that is that I think animals are often overlooked as being worthy recipients of our attempts to create meaning through kindness. We started attending the church when my oldest was a baby. Both of my girls are now almost grown, but being adjacently involved in the UU program, RE program provided me with a simplistic yet thorough acquaintance with the 7 principles. And I was always struck with the thoughtfulness, the precision of the way our values were articulated therein, particularly principles 1 and 2, which are, 1, we believe in the inherent dignity and worth of all people, and 2, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. As an animal rights guy, I did wonder about the inclusion of the word human in both principles, but was able to forgive that as they are both so elegantly stated. The kids' version of principles 1 and 2, as we just sang, were altered to 1, each person is worthwhile, and 2, be kind in all you do. While the first still includes the word person, the second leaves out the specificity to humans in the kids' version. Be kind in all you do, which I like a little better. I always wondered what the rationale behind the exclusion of beings other than humans in the designation of possessing inherent worth. It always seemed rather species-centric to me. Why were other animals excluded from having inherent worth in UU thinking? Was it our intelligence, our capacity for reason and advanced thinking? Well, we don't exclude humans who are lacking in those capacities from having inherent worth. Moreover, I don't think many of us would subscribe to the notion that the degree of inherent worth possessed by an individual is relative to their particular aptitude for reason. From whence, then, this inherent dignity and worth that we ascribe to humans? The only sense in which it makes sense to me is that people are individuals. They possess a unique personhood, a soul, if you will. But thinking about it this way does not logically exclude certain other animals from the designation of possessing inherent dignity and worth. Science has only somewhat recently been forced to lend the title of sentient to a range of species other than humans. That means that in the eyes of science, they possess a sense of self and experience complex emotions. Dr. Jane Goodall, a personal hero of mine, talks about being taught in her early education that animals did not possess any self-awareness, that their behavior was purely instinctual and not based in any internal sense of identity or actual perceptual awareness. Dr. Goodall said she knew at the time that such assertions were absurd. You cannot share your life with a dog, she said, and not know perfectly well that animals have personalities and minds and feelings. Comedian and actor and proponent of animal rights, Ricky Gervais, had this to say about dogs. A dog, they're amazing, they're magical. It's the closest I get to spirituality, just watching a dog. They're amazing, they're beautiful, they've got soul, they're amazing. They're brilliant. Honestly, there's nothing as beautiful as a dog. I couldn't invent a better thing. There's nothing as good. There's nothing else outside friends, some human relations. I mean, there's no better thing. Not a car, not a house, not money. A dog. It's effing amazing. It's 15 years of joy and then terrible sadness. But here's the thing that both Goodall and Gervais acknowledge. While dogs have a special innate ability to relate to humans, they're not even in the top echelon of intelligent animals. Notably, pigs score higher than dogs in most cognitive tests. Many people profess a great compassion and love for certain animals, but that love and compassion is not extended to the animals that they happen to eat, or to animals who don't happen to be cute and fuzzy. Historically, Homo sapiens has not been an especially good travel companion to the non-human species who are forced to share this rock with us. I'm not a vegetarian or a vegan per se. I'm a person who is interested in minimizing the amount of harm I do in this world and not contributing to the staggering amounts of pain and suffering happening right now. I believe that animals have the right, as conscious, sentient individuals, to not be exploited, to not be subjected to cruel and inhumane treatment, in exactly the same way that I believe humans have that right, and for exactly the same reasons. And I'm pretty sure that every person here believes that too. If I were to show you the kinds of conditions endured by our food animals in industrial factory meat production, I think everyone here would say that's wrong and it should stop. But there's a persistent disconnect cognitively between the conditions in factory farms and the food on our dinner plates. Here's the thing. I'm not always that easy to get along with. I can be selfish and insensitive, intolerant, judgmental, and just foul sometimes. And there's only so much I can do about that. I'm only human after all, but I can set up certain roadblocks, certain rules that help me be an agent of kindness in an effort to make my life mean something, to create meaning. And one of those things is to try to make consumer choices that minimize harm, like not contributing to the funding of systematic animal exploitation and suffering. But that's just me. I think that when we realize that creating meaning in our lives is an exercise in kindness, we can start to tailor our behavior to that goal. So I'm not exactly suggesting that you pick the same ways of minimizing harm as I do, but that we all think about life that way. How do we maximize kindness, love, enjoyment, security, and peace, and minimize harm and suffering? Major religions generally ascribe a sort of special status to humans that, they believe, has been endowed by their creator. Most UUs I know wouldn't subscribe to that kind of thinking, but I wonder if that fact led to the updated UU values and covenant that sort of replaced the 7 principles. The section called Interdependence reads, "We honor the interdependent web of all existence, with reverence for the great web of life, and with humility we acknowledge our place in it. We covenant to protect Earth and all beings from exploitation. We will create and nurture sustainable relationships of care and respect, mutuality and justice." Is that what they meant to say? Protect all beings from exploitation? I'm not sure how anyone could look at conditions on a factory farm and not call that exploitation, or worse. And it's certainly not a sustainable relationship of care, respect, and justice. So according to this document, as UUs, we're called not only to not participate in exploitation, but to actively protect other beings from it. As UUs, we're not bound by any creed, but that sounds like a good one, doesn't it? If so, this notion represents a radical divergence from all human history. Back to natural history class. About 50,000 years ago, a group of great apes called Homo sapiens made their way to an island we now call Australia. There they found giant wallabies the size of rhinos, 20-foot-tall ostriches, and other large species of land animals that made a great food source due to their not having evolved with other predators. Over the next few thousand years, many of these species went extinct due to human hunting. Similar scenarios were playing out in other parts of the world. By 10,000 years ago, groups of hunting humans chased the last of the woolly mammoth populations into the far reaches of Siberia until they rendered them extinct. The natural balance of the world was being upset by this new species of great ape with its large, sophisticated brain and proclivity to use tools such as spears. Fast forward to the Industrial Revolution, which saw the beginning of the sixth great mass extinction event that has occurred on Earth. This one, driven by the activities of one species, Homo sapiens. At the same time, technological innovation, exploding populations, and rampant capitalism drove the need for better and faster means of meat production, and animals became just another component of a meat production factory. Human civilization is, in large part, based on animal exploitation. Most people assume that there are some kind of laws in place that protect, to some extent, the welfare of food animals, some minimal guidelines that limit this level of suffering to which these meat factories can subject animals. There are none. It is, like many industries in the modern world, a race to the ethical bottom. Whoever chooses to limit the efficiency of their production system by giving some consideration to ethical behavior loses the race. So the question is, how much suffering is too much in order to have some meat? I assure you, wherever you draw that line, it's been crossed miles ago. The next question is there any amount of suffering that is too much? What I'm suggesting today is that we look for ways to make some meaning of our time here on earth, to be agents through our daily behavior of kindness, love, peace, and compassion, because that, I think, is the answer to the question, what are we doing here?